Hi everybody, Mr. Barker here again. You should have already watched the presentation for the resume cover letter. If you have not yet, pause this one or close it out and open up that one and play it first. I'll reference a couple of things from that one that I spoke to on the previous lecture. So there are assignments. Let me pull this up on my other screen here. The assignment that we're doing, we're writing a functional resume and cover letter in reply to a job advertisement. The job advertisement is Department of Engineering at Pima seeking applicants for a student lab assistant. So we'll take a look at writing the resume. Cover letter would go on top of the resume. So this may seem like a silly question, why write a resume? Obviously the answer is you're trying to get a job, but we'll see. This one I disagree with a little bit. Oh, if I didn't mention, I mentioned it on the other slideshow, but this is out of chapter 12 of our textbook, Becoming a Technical Professional. This first bullet here, I disagree with somewhat. We're going to talk about in a minute writing basically an opening paragraph on your resume. I don't do it that way. I think this information should go on your cover letter. So I would say if you are going to do a cover letter, which normally you would, this is not really a personal pitch. Your resume is your qualifications and your background, your education, jobs that you've had. Really, I believe the personal pitch should be addressed in the cover letter, not necessarily in your resume. But these next couple of ones definitely do apply. One of the reasons why we're doing this and we're doing it so early is you want to get this thing going. You want to keep track of things that you've learned in classes at this point. If you have a job, obviously those things would go in there. But at this point, really, you're adding technical skills that you have, which will go at the end of the resume. We'll talk about in a bit. But it's to help you keep track of your professional experience. So even after I retired from the military and I didn't have a job for a while, I still had a resume. And when I would do things, whether it was volunteer work or something like that, I would just throw it in there as you go. It'll just be easier when you do end up having to put all this information together. You don't have to say, oh, well, when did I work? I did that 2-month thing last summer. And so you have the dates. Just keep it updated regularly. And then, of course, you'll modify it, as I mentioned in the cover letter. You modify your resume for the particular job that you're seeking for. But you should have one master resume that has everything that you've ever done, all the skills and things that you've learned, and then you'll tailor it to the specific job that you're looking for. But it's definitely a good way to keep track of those things so you don't have to try to figure out what 2 to 3 months you worked at a particular job, or to keep track of skills that you're developing along the way. And this last one, this is definitely a truism. Resumes and cover letters can get you an interview, and the interview is what's ultimately going to get you the job. So we'll look at some do's and don'ts, some formatting, winning words. We'll look at the list of words, which again, this is all out of beginning of chapter 12 in the text. Do's and don'ts we'll go over somewhat in depth. And proofreading. Every time I go over my resume, even if it's been a month since I edited it for something, you'll find a typo. Look at it yourself, have someone look it over, bring it to the resource center. They can help you look over and make sure there definitely cannot be any syntactical or grammatical errors in your resume. Go back to this one. To use a functional resume is if you do have gaps in your work history, it may potentially be better to just list the jobs and qualifications without necessarily referencing how long ago a particular job was, for example. But typically chronological is probably going to go. So a functional resume de-emphasizes dates, as we were just talking about, categorizes your skills by function and emphasizes your abilities, and shows your skills and experience that back up why they should interview you for the job. Maybe changing careers, recent college graduates that don't have really much work history to speak of. So you're emphasizing your skills and your knowledge, not necessarily your work history. So a combination combines these two. Really, I guess I would say, my resume is kind of a combination resume in the sense that when we look at the closing parts of it where you list your skills and such, instead of having them in line, I do list my previous jobs chronologically, but then at the end, it's technically kind of a combination resume. If you have a a decent section down at the bottom where you're listing job functions and other skills that you have. So this kind of speaks to what I was talking about, how mine is kind of a combination of the two. So what do we put in a resume? I'm just going to click through these because we'll see examples of all of these as we go through. Don't necessarily need an objective and summary statement. That kind of goes back to what I was talking to you about. That is often more appropriate to have in your cover letter, not necessarily the resume itself. Definitely list volunteer experience. Even if it's not strictly related to the job that you're seeking, that may give you a bump over someone else to show that you're doing something above and beyond just doing the 9-to-5er. And definitely specialized skills, relevant activities and organizations. If you're going to be an electrical engineer, for example, you should get a student membership to the IEEE, SAME, SAME for mechanical engineers, and any honors that will go in your education section at the very top. Summa cum laude, for example, if you graduate with high honors from your. Okay, and I'm just going to go to the next slide here, which gives an example of all of these things. It says your name should appear in the first line larger than the bolded, as we see here. So I'll just leave this up for a second. I put my objective in the cover letter. You can mention the specific position that you're applying for in your resume. If you have a cover letter, again, not strictly necessary. Because one of the reasons why I say that is you don't want your resume to be too long. I mean, really between 1 to 3 pages. You want to keep it as short and as concise as possible. And definitely, as it mentions in the first bullet, targeted to the specific job that you're looking for. So here's a couple of reasons why you might consider writing an objective at the top of your resume. And continuing on here. Second to last bullet again, show your ability to contribute to the success of the company. That's probably a big one. Crazy with the arrow key there. So take a look at these. Okay, summary statement at the end of your resume. Not strictly necessary. I do not include a summary statement on my resume either. I keep that in my summary statement on my cover letter. Definitely no more than 3 or 4 lines if you do include one. I would say probably 2 sentences, maybe 3. Take note of some of the verbiage used in here, the words that are used: resourceful, innovative, initiative, and communication and supervisory skills. Definitely communication skills, as we discussed on the first day of class. Communication skills here, your written communication skills, will definitely say a lot about you and why they should hire you. Engineers are typically, that is not typically, an engineer's strongest asset. So if you can show that in your resume, that's okay. I'll just leave this up for a second and then we'll click over to see examples of these. Definitely include your GPA if it's good. If you had a 2.3, I don't know that I would necessarily put it on there. And academic honors that I mentioned a couple of minutes ago, Dean's List, honors from the college you graduated from, cum laude, summa cum laude, etc. So here's some examples of what it could look like. Okay, if you're doing a chronological resume, you're going to list the most recent job first. Generally 3 to 10 years, totally depends on the job. And if you have something that, obviously you're probably not going to have a work history that's more than 10 years old at this point. Some of you may. You can include jobs that are older if they're particularly pertinent to the job that you're looking for. And these, if you look at the second bullet on here, these are definitely going to be tailored to the particular job that you're interested in. But have your master resume, as I discussed, and then you'll tailor this, normally trim it down significantly to just focus on your work history or your experience or abilities that are specifically related to the job. Okay, and we'll see examples of these as well. These should be self-explanatory. Who you worked for, what your job was, where the company was, do include city and state or location of the company, when you were there, and what your duties and responsibilities. Okay, here's things to not do. We're not going to write our resume in first person. We're not going to use I anywhere in our resume. You can in your cover letter choose to do so, but not in your resume. Do not make your resume too long. Do not make it difficult to follow. If you're using a functional resume, don't make it complicated. Don't make the HR person or the hiring authority read through and try to find stuff. It needs to be very specific and concise. Measurable, quantifiable information. We'll see some examples of those. Okay, so a poor description of what you did at a particular company would be that you were a receptionist and you answered the phone. So how could we phrase that in such a way that's meaningful to someone? What did you do? Notice quantifying things, 99% accuracy, determine the nature of the call, effectively transferred the calls. And as someone that, if your job was sorting incoming mail, that's not a great description of what your job duties were. So write something more precise, like in the blue, collected, sorted, distributed, again, quantifiable, 200 mail messages, staff members, regular intervals throughout the day. Okay, I'll let you read through these two. Short and concise does not mean something like, oh, I created drawings. Write what you did, what program you used. ANSI and ASME are standards that you were using in producing those drawings, for example. Not sure that 95% accuracy for completing the drawings would be something I would put in there, but you get the point. Notice how these job description examples all start out. They start out with some verb. I led this, I was responsible for that, I developed these things, and again, quantifiable whenever possible. And I'll just emphasize the last bullet on this slide. Be specific about what you know and how it relates to the job that you want. Remember, you're always going to tailor your resume, and you're going to look at the knowledge, skills, and abilities that they're looking for this particular job, and be specific about how your skills can apply. They might not have been exactly what they're looking for, so you need to go in and relate what your knowledge, skills, and abilities and how they apply to the job that you're looking for. So some examples of skill statements. Organizational memberships we discussed. And hopefully the last bullet is self-explanatory. Unless you're specifically applying for a job in a political organization or a religious organization, you should probably avoid mentioning those altogether. Okay, we talked about this. Society of Mechanical Engineers. I mentioned IEEE also for electrical engineers and other student organizations and things that you're affiliated with as well. Okay, so pull up a list of winning words. Make sure that you're using the correct present or past tense, current jobs, obviously present tense, past jobs, past tense, and make sure as you're reading through them that you're not accidentally switching back and forth. When you're mentioning a past job, make sure you're a previous job, make sure you're always using past tense and you don't accidentally switch back and forth. Okay, so here's some good action verbs for you to use. Brief, mentioned this, 1 to 2 pages, 3 pages if you have a longer work history, potentially certainly not longer than 3 for anything you're probably going to be doing in the near future. Okay. Include a cover letter, neat, organized, and professional. Remember, proofread, make sure that you have at least one other person look over it for you 1 or more times. Don't switch your font and verb tense. Don't change the font throughout your resume. You may have specific things that might either be in italics or bold, but that's probably going to be about it. Don't use fancy paper. Don't give personal information other than your contact information. Don't include salary information. That will come later in the job hiring process. And this last one here, include hobbies or personal interests unless they relate to your objective. Again, I would leave those out of the resume and put that on the cover letter. Proofread. Capitalization is important. We'll talk about that as we start getting into writing our technical reports for the class as well. Here are some places where you can find templates. This is maybe a bit of a research project for you to find one that you're happy with, or you can just use one of the Microsoft templates. Some of them are actually, there's a couple of resume ones that are built into Microsoft Word, but you can go online and find more in line with these and improve on these resume objective statements.